Welcome to the Minibook Podcast, African American Books Edition. Today we are looking at a truly provocative collection of essays. It's titled The Black Agenda. The book is by the late legendary journalist Glen Ford with a preface by Margaret Kimberley.
It is such a powerful piece of work. And before we really get into it, we have a few important things to note.
Okay.
First, we thank you for listening, and please consider subscribing for future content. And second, after hearing our discussion, we would really encourage you to go out and purchase this book and support the author.
Absolutely. It's so important to support this kind of independent journalism. Now, in the spirit of transparency, we also need to state that the voices you're hearing right now are AI generated, but the content, the ideas, the history, all the analysis, it comes straight from the book itself.
It does, and we feel that this is a great way to learn about African American history.
It really is. And to be honest, Glen Ford's perspective is one you just to pick of. You rarely get in the standard history books.
Oh, not at all. This is a man who looked at the political landscape of America and saw things that, others were either too polite or maybe too afraid to point out.
That is putting it mildly. I mean, we are talking about a journalist who wasn't interested in making friends with the establishment.
No.
He was interested in the truth no matter how uncomfortable it made people.
Exactly. Margaret Kimberley, who wrote the preface, she describes him as the penultimate race man.
Race man. That is a term you don't hear much anymore. It feels very specific to a certain era. Can we unpack that for a second?
Yeah, it is a bit retro. It comes largely from the segregation era, but it's a badge of honor in this context.
Right.
A race man was, well, typically a community leader, a lawyer, a journalist, someone like that, who was completely dedicated to the needs and advancement of Black people.
So a singular focus.
A singular, uncompromising focus. Kimberly uses it for Ford because he never tried to, go along to get along. He wasn't interested in comfort. He was interested in liberation.
And looking at his background, it seems like he was almost born into that role. I was reading his bio, and he's described as a red diaper baby.
That's a great term. It means he was the child of communist parents. He was born Glen Rutherford in 1949. So just imagine growing up in a house where questioning the government, capitalism, all of that. It wasn't rebellion. It was dinner table conversation.
Right.
His father, Rudy, was actually a pioneer in his own right. He was the first Black man to host a non-gospel TV program in the Deep South.
That's incredible context. But the detail that really blew my mind, and I think gives him so much cool credit, is his connection to James Brown.
The godfather of soul. Yes.
I mean, can you imagine starting your career in radio at a station owned by James Brown?
WRDW in Augusta, Georgia. And here's the funny part. Glen's birth name was Rutherford. But James Brown, being the showman that he was, told him, Glen Rutherford is too long for the radio. Shortened it to Ford. It sounds better.
So the name Glen Ford was basically an editorial decision by James Brown. That's amazing. But Ford didn't just play the hits. He used that microphone to educate. And that brings us to the core of this book. If there's one concept that defines Glen Ford's worldview, it has to be his theory of the Black misleadership class.
This is the absolute pillar of his work. You cannot understand Ford without understanding this critique.
It's such a biting phrase, misleadership. So who are these people, and why does Ford think they are, misleading the community?
Ford argues that after the major victories of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, after the Voting Rights Act, and especially after the assassinations of Malcolm X and Dr. King, a new class of Black figures emerged.
Okay.
These were the politicians, the corporate elites, the appointed officials, and Ford says this group abandoned the goal of transforming the system. Instead, they settled for representation within the system.
Transformation versus representation. That feels like a really critical distinction.
It is everything to Ford. Representation means, hey, look, we have a Black mayor or a Black CEO. It looks like progress on the surface. But Ford argues that these figures, they act as a buffer. They protect the ruling class, the wealthy establishment, from the grievances of the Black masses.
So they get the personal career bumps, the prestige.
Exactly. But the structural issues, the poverty, the oppression of the working class people they claim to represent, that stays exactly the same.
So effectively, he's saying they traded the movement for a seat at the table.
Precisely. He argues they shut down the grassroots friction, the actual movement, in favor of electoral politics, all inside the Democratic Party. And he doesn't just throw this out as a theory. He brings receipts. Did you catch the part about the obscene 14?
I did. It sounds like a Western movie title, but it's actually about Congress?
Right. It refers to 14 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and Ford was absolutely furious with them because they voted to continue NSA bulk spying on American citizens.
Which is
Yeah.
wild, because if there is any demographic in America that knows the dangers of government surveillance, it is the Black community.
That's the point. From COINTELPRO spying on Dr. King to the surveillance of the Black Panthers, Black Americans have historically been the primary targets. So for Black leadership to vote to protect the state's ability to spy rather than protecting their own constituents' civil liberties, to Ford, that was a betrayal of the highest order.
And it proved that their loyalty was to the state, not the people.
Yes, the state apparatus, not the people who voted them in.
That betrayal links directly to his broader critique of American politics. I think the standard assumption is that a race man, as we called him, would be a loyal Democrat. But Ford, he had zero patience for the Democratic Party.
Zero. He used the term duopoly.
Duopoly. Okay, let's break that down for people listening.
Well, a monopoly is one controlling power. A duopoly is two. Ford argued that the Republicans and Democrats are essentially two wings of the same bird. He famously said there isn't a dime's worth of difference between them when it comes to the big stuff, war and Wall Street.
He believed they both served the same corporate masters.
The same donors, yep.
But you always hear the counter-argument, right? Well, you have to vote for the lesser of two evils. People say, sure, the Democrats aren't perfect, but the alternative is worse.
And this is where Ford drops perhaps his most controversial, most challenging argument in the entire book. He looked at the presidency of Barack Obama, and he didn't see the lesser evil. He called Obama the more effective evil.
Wow. That is a heavy, heavy charge. More effective. How does he justify that?
It comes down to resistance. Think about it.
Yeah.
If a Republican president tries to bail out big banks while regular people are losing their homes.
The left protests. The Black community mobilizes. There's outrage.
Exactly. There's friction. But Ford argued that when a Black Democrat, especially someone as charismatic and symbolically important as Obama, does those exact same things, the resistance just evaporates. The Black radical tradition, which is usually anti-war and anti-corporate, was sedated.
Because people wanted to defend the first Black president.
They wanted to defend him so badly that they stayed silent on the policies he was actually enacting.
So the identity of the president acted as a shield for the establishment.
Yes. Ford argues that Obama was able to implement corporate policies, like the massive bank bailouts during the foreclosure crisis, with very little pushback from the very people losing their homes, because opposing him felt like you were aiding the racists who hated him. It just neutralized the opposition.
It's a psychological trap. He has a really vivid way of describing the inauguration in 2009. He calls it the Black Hajj.
Yes, comparing it to the pilgrimage to Mecca. He described millions of Black Americans going to Washington not to make political demands, but just to be there, to witness the miracle. He called it deliverance and delirium.
And delirium usually implies you aren't seeing things clearly.
And that was his point. He felt that in that moment of celebration, political demands were silenced. They were silenced to protect the symbol. And the tragedy in Ford's analysis is that under the Obama presidency, Black wealth actually plummeted, largely due to the housing crash. But the political outcry was muted because of who was in the White House.
It forces you to separate the symbol from the substance. And Ford seems to be saying that symbols can actually be dangerous because they can blind you to the reality of the policy.
Results over symbolism. That was his mantra.
This skepticism of American mythology isn't just limited to current politics. He takes a sledgehammer to some historical traditions, too. I don't think I'll ever look at Thanksgiving the same way after reading his take.
It is brutal, but he argues it's necessary history.
Yeah.
Ford refused to celebrate Thanksgiving. He didn't see it as a happy harvest festival. He viewed it as a celebration of the Pequot Massacre and the onset of genocide against Native Americans.
He calls it a national consecration of the unspeakable.
It's a poetic but devastating phrase. He points out a historical reality that often gets glossed over. When the Pilgrims arrived, they didn't find an empty wilderness. They found a cemetery.
A cemetery?
Yes. The land had already been cleared because smallpox and other diseases from earlier Europeans had already wiped out huge numbers of the indigenous populations. So to Ford, building a national celebration on that foundation and ignoring the death that made it possible is a moral failure. It's celebrating a crime scene.
And he brings that same analysis of erasure and displacement right into the 21st century. His writing on Hurricane Katrina is chilling.
He calls the current era the Age of Katrina.
Which implies Katrina wasn't just a one-time weather event.
No, he argues it's a template. For Ford, Katrina wasn't just a hurricane. It was a calculated opportunity for Black removal.
Black removal? That sounds incredibly organized.
He argues it was. He says that after the storm, corporate interests and local government seized the chance to reshape New Orleans. They didn't just rebuild, they gentrified. They permanently displaced the poor black residents to break black political power in the city. They replaced public housing with developments the original residents couldn't afford.
So they used the disaster to change the demographics.
And Ford argues we see this happening everywhere now. Gentrification in Brooklyn, in Oakland, in D.C. It's all the age of Katrina. Poor black populations being pushed out of the urban centers they built.
It really connects back to that misleadership class concept we started with, the idea that there was no strong leadership to stop this because they were too busy cutting deals with developers.
Precisely. The buffer class was working for the developers, not the displaced.
I want to pivot to something that feels a little more empowering, though still really complex. We talked about James Brown earlier. Ford has an essay titled James Brown, the Man Who Named a People.
This is one of my favorite insights in the book, because it's about the power of language and self-definition.
It's fascinating. He credits James Brown with a massive act of democratic self-determination.
Well, think about the late 1960s. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of debate about what black people should be called. Negro, colored, Afro-American. It was all unsettled.
And then James Brown drops a track.
Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. 1968. Ford argues that Brown didn't wait for a committee. He didn't ask permission from the intellectuals. He released that song, and it acted like a popular referendum. Black people voted with their voices. By singing the song, they chose the name Black for themselves. It was organic. It came from the streets.
But then Ford contrasts that with the shift to African American in the late 80s. I grew up thinking African American was the more respectful, progressive term.
And that is exactly what makes Ford's take so subversive. He argues that African American wasn't chosen by the people. It was chosen by a select group of elites, specifically mentioning a meeting led by Jesse Jackson in a hotel room in 1988.
So it was a top-down rebranding effort.
Exactly. Ford views African American as a term designed to sound more assimilated, more ethnic, in the way Italian American sounds. But Black was a political identity, a challenge to the system. Ford preferred Black because the people chose it themselves.
That distinction between grassroots culture and elite management really is the thread running through this whole book, isn't it?
It is. Whether it's politics, music, language, Ford is always asking, who is driving the bus, the people or the elites?
Speaking of the people driving the bus, we have to talk about Black Lives Matter. You'd assume, given Ford's radicalism, that he would be the #1 fan of BLM.
It's nuanced. He supported the people in the streets. He believed the anger about police violence was righteous and necessary. But he was incredibly critical of the organization and its specific leadership figures like Alicia Garza and DeRay Mckesson.
What was his issue with them?
He felt they were making the same mistakes as the post-civil rights generation. He argued they were too cozy with the Democratic National Committee. He famously said they were begging to be caught.
Begging to be caught. That's a strange phrase.
It means they were begging to be co-opted. He feared that the raw, transformative energy of the streets was being funneled back into the safe, manageable machinery of the Democratic Party.
He wanted them to make demands, not just get seats at the table.
Concrete demands of power. Exactly.
This leads right into the reparations debate. This has moved from the fringe to the mainstream in the last few years. Where did Ford stand?
He has an essay called, "We Are Already Late to the Great Black Reparations Debate." He was pro-reparations, absolutely.
Right.
But, and this is the key, he didn't trust the government to just write a bill like H.R. 40 and solve it.
Why not? Wouldn't a bill be the solution?
Because if the misleadership class negotiates the deal, Ford argued, the money won't go to the people who need it most. He believed there needs to be a massive internal debate among black people first. Black people need to decide collectively what repair actually looks like.
So don't let the politicians decide the payout.
Right. He warned that if it's just a check from the government, it might pacify the movement without changing the structure of the economy. He wanted reparations to be truly transformative.
We've covered domestic politics, history, culture, but we can't wrap up without touching on foreign policy. Ford was an internationalist.
He was a staunch anti-imperialist.
Imperialism is another one of those words that gets thrown around. Let's break it down. What did Ford mean when he used it?
In Ford's context, imperialism refers to U.S. dominance over other nations through military and economic force. And he was particularly focused on Africa. He wrote extensively about the destruction of Libya and the ongoing crisis in the Congo.
And this loops back to his critique of Obama, doesn't it?
It does. He argued that U.S. interventions in Africa, often overseen by black leadership, like Obama or Susan Rice, caused mass suffering. He refused to give them a pass just because they were black. In fact, he held them to a higher standard.
It seems Ford felt that true black liberation had to be global. You can't be free here if your government is oppressing people there.
That is the legacy of Malcolm X, which Ford defended fiercely.
He had a problem with how Malcolm X is remembered today,
A
right?
huge problem. He heavily criticized Manning Marable's biography of Malcolm X. Ford felt that modern historians tried to tame Malcolm. They tried to paint him as someone who was becoming a liberal integrationist at the end of his life, someone who would have eventually joined the Democratic Party.
And Ford says, no way.
Ford insists Malcolm remained a revolutionary nationalist until the bullet hit him. He wanted to overturn the system, not join it. Ford saw himself as a guardian of that fiery legacy.
It's amazing how consistent he was. Whether he was talking about James Brown, Obama, the Congo, or Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
he was always looking at power. Who has it? How are they using it?
And are we being sold a narrative that keeps us in our place? That's the ultimate question. Are we changing the system, or are we just decorating it with diverse faces?
That is the question the Black Agenda leaves you with. It is not a book that is here to make you feel comfortable.
Not at all.
It's here to make you think, and probably to make you argue.
And that's why it is so valuable. Even if you disagree with his conclusions, Glen Ford forces you to confront assumptions you didn't even know you had. He was a relentless truth teller.
We have covered a lot of ground today. From the Black misleadership class to the more effective evil to the age of Katrina, it's a dense, heavy, essential book.
It's a lot to digest, for sure, but it clarifies so much of the current political landscape.
It certainly does. We hope this discussion has given you a new perspective on African American history and politics. As we mentioned at the start, if you found this interesting, please subscribe and tell a friend. Word of mouth is how we grow.
And we want to hear from you. Are there other books you would like us to cover? Please drop your suggestions in the comments. We read them, and we want to know what you want to learn about.
And finally, please go out and purchase The Black Agenda by Glen Ford. Support the author's estate and keep these ideas in circulation.
Thank you for subscribing and for listening.
We'll see you next time.